Are you guys familiar with the name Leonard Wood? Maybe it rings a bell of a famous military fort in Missouri, but it was named after a famous general who also happened to be a Freemason. And we're going to hear all about that story tonight. We have a great guest on with us that's going to help walk us through the amazing history there and his legacy. So stick with us. We have a great episode lined up for you right after this on Historical Light.
Welcome back to the Historical Light Masonic Podcast, dedicated to illuminate our past and bring our Masonic history to light since 2016. And now, enjoy the show.
Good evening and welcome back to Historical Light, independent Masonic show focused on the historical events and aspects within Freemasonry. I'm your host, Brother Alex Powers, and we're pleased to have with us a brand new guest to the show, Brother Andy Albright. Thank you so much for being here, brother. How you doing?
Thank you, Brother Alex. I'm doing fantastic. It's a lovely rainy night here in Charleston, South Carolina. Hope y'all are doing well out there in Kansas City.
Doing good, man. We're so stoked to have you here today, and I am really looking forward to kind of hearing about this story. I didn't realize that Wood was a Mason to start with, so I think there's going to be some fascinating history here to uncover. But before we get into that, I want to know a little bit about you. So if you wouldn't mind, who are you in Freemasonry, and what brought you to Freemasonry to start with?
In the state of South Carolina, worshipful Brother Andy, past master of two lodges, Carolina 375 and Fiat Lux 432. I helped found that lodge. I'm a past Grand Pursuivant of the Grand Lodge of South Carolina.
Nice.
Masonic roots, as best I know, I'm a third consecutive generation, but it goes back much further. My Masonic roots run very deep here in the Charleston Low Country area of South Carolina, going all the way back to at least the end of the 17th century.
Wow.
Descendant of French Huguenots, one of which, Paul Dubois, was a captain in the Continental Regulars who fought with the famous Swamp Fox, General Francis Marion. And he owned a tavern where Ancient York Lodge 26 met, and where the South Carolina legislature eventually had to flee when Cornwallis laid siege to Charleston.
Wow.
Well, proudly, I'm a grandfather of 4 granddaughters.
Fantastic.
There.
Well, so that's quite the lineage in Freemasonry. I'm curious, is that what brought you to Masonry to begin with, or what is it that put Masonry in front of you and made you decide this is something I want to join?
I was a DMLA when I lived in Georgia, and so that was my first introduction. And for years, I just put off getting interested in Masonry.
Sure.
And I came across some friends, and they asked me one day, they said, "Wait a minute, are you a traveling man?" I had no idea what he was asking me. I said, what am I doing? What? And the more I talked to him, the more it kind of brought it out of me. And then I decided, you know what? I think it's time. And in 2012, I petitioned Carolina Lodge 375 in little town called Hanahan. And I was raised October 30th, 2012. And since then, it brought out this gift, if you will, of being a teacher.
Sure.
I'm the committee chairman for education for the Valley of Charleston, Scottish Rite. I've traveled all over the state doing educations, even got an invite to come to Chicago in 2022 and speak at the Double Eagle Con.
Nice.
that was quite the adventure. And so yeah, it was the seed of masonry has always been in my heart. Just for some reason, just late in life, it decided to blossom, and once it started to grow, it just has not slowed down.
That's fantastic. So you've obviously got a lot going on there, and I kind of already get the answer, but I still got to ask you, what in your words would you say has kept you around since joining Masonry?
What's kept me around? That's a question I'm not really sure what the answer is. I mean,
Fair
I'm
enough.
just enthralled with the lessons and the esoteric studies that I do, but it's the success, and by that I mean it's the way what I've done has inspired a lot of other younger Masons
Sure.
to step up, do things. Um, like I teach lecturing classes, and not just to memorize the lecture, but the art of lecturing, the importance of word cadence, enunciation, a breath mint so you don't get dry mouth while you're speaking, moving the candidate around the floor because they're coming down off an adrenaline rush, and you want to keep that heart rate up so they don't fall asleep on you while you're giving a talk.
Right.
Um, and that's inspired other Masons now to start learning the lectures, and they've
Sure.
become excellent speakers on their own right. So it's the candle lit in me, and now seeing it lit in others. I love it, absolutely love it, and it's like, so I guess the answer, what keeps me hanging around, is being inspired and being an inspiration at the same time.
Hey, I love it, man. That's what keeps this whole thing keep going on, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, dude, I am stoked to dive into our main topic this evening and learn all about General Leonard Wood. But before we do, I get to give a special shout out over to our Patreon supporters who have kept the show going. We've been around since 2016, dedicated to Masonic history. Pretty sure we're the only podcast that's fully dedicated to Masonic history. And we really like what we do. And if you like what we do, you can support us through Patreon. We got several different levels there and some really cool perks to go along with that. And you help us keep the lights on over here. Now, I do got to say, you see the link down there, historicallight.com. Unfortunately, you try to go to that right now, it's going to be a big nothing. Yep, we got hacked. They destroyed the entire site. Luckily, hey, I'm a web designer. Unluckily, I'm OCD, so I'm having to build it from the ground up, and you know what that means. Yeah, all kinds of new ideas. So give me a couple days, we'll have that up. But you guys can go directly to Patreon, search us on there, Historical Light. You'll find us. And, we'll keep all the cool stuff going. Everything else is still on YouTube, still on Facebook, all that good. And of course, the audio sides across all the major podcast networks. So you can still find us anywhere you need to. We'll have that website up back soon. One more quick note. MasoniCon Kansas is right around the corner. Coming up in July, it's starting to get warm out, which means MasoniCon's coming. We've got a really, really good lineup this year. Third year we're doing it. I am stoked. It's going to be amazing, and I hope every single one of you will come join us. You can head on over to MasoniConKansas.com and grab your tickets now. Do it soon if you haven't already, because the early bird ticket pricing is ending this month. So get those tickets in now. We would love to see you guys. We've got speakers coming in from all over the country and internationally, and we have a guest list of just the same regard. So come on in. We'd love to see you right here in the KC area for MasoniCon 2024. All right, brother, let's talk Leonard Wood. Now, I know you have developed a presentation around this, so I am stoked to hear what you got, and I will throw in some questions as they arise. Now, do you just want to speak, or do you have slides?
I'll just speak. I don't have slides for this.
Nah, that's all good. I love it.
Well, it's safe to say that I came across the name Leonard Wood in December of 1984 because I did my Army basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, which is among the Army branches known as Fort Lost in the Woods, because it is out there. It is a very large military installation. It's one of the largest in the training and doctrine command. They teach driving, the 88 mics, which is your heavy equipment drivers, combat engineers. So it's a large facility, does quite a bit out there. But the namesake, Leonard Wood, he was born in New England area. He was born in Maine. He was born October 8th, 1860. So he would have been born right before the Civil War. But his father was a surgeon in the Union Army and was a Civil War veteran. That's important because it would build this animosity in Leonard Wood's father. It would build this animosity towards the Army, towards any combat. He wanted his son to have nothing to do with it. Problem is, Leonard Wood, growing up in this rural area in Maine, was the outdoors type. He felt this draw to want to be in the Army. He had this overwhelming desire. He wanted to be a commissioned officer and lead troops into combat. And his father absolutely forbade it, just would not allow it to happen. And in that particular area, that era of time, son would do as his father commands, more or less. So Leonard Wood himself was actually a doctor. He went to Harvard Medical School, graduated there, and did his internship in Boston City Hospital. And even though he was this physician, medical doctor, it never squelched his desire to want to be in the armed services. So he did buck against his father in January of 1886 by signing a contract as a surgeon for the United States Army 4th Cavalry out of Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Now, he was given the rank of second lieutenant. However, he was not a commissioned officer. Much like the Surgeon General today, they wear a Navy officer uniform, but they are not Navy. They're not a naval officer, have absolutely zero military authority. And Leonard Wood had that. He was in that situation. He kind of had what he wanted, but not really there yet. And yet was be the operative word. As part of the 4th Cavalry, he was signed under the command of General Nelson A. Miles. Now, that name rings a bell. General Miles was commander of the cavalry troop that were charged with running down and apprehending the Chiricahua Apaches, more especially one named Geronimo, during that campaign. And Leonard Wood was the surgeon attached to that unit. He moved out with that unit, tended to any soldier that was injured. But as it would happen, during one particular engagement, an officer was injured, was unable to continue leading his troops. So Leonard Wood abandoned his post as surgeon and took up infantry platoon leader. And he led these men into combat, and he did it rather successfully. And it caught the attention of General Miles. But what really got Leonard Wood into the circle of fame in the armed services, he was charged to carry some dispatches, and he had to cover over 100 miles by himself. And think about this as 100 miles through desert, hostile terrain, unknowing if any Apache were laying in wait for him. So he covered this 100 miles in 2 days. And that's on horse. Records show that he walked the last 30 miles on foot one day. So that robustness about him that he learned as a youth running in the woods of Maine paid off for his survival skills in the deserts out in what's now Arizona area, New Mexico. For that action, he was nominated and confirmed to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. And here's where a great schism developed between Leonard Wood and regular army officers. As I mentioned, Leonard Wood was not commissioned. He had no formal military training whatsoever. He was a physician. He signed on as a doctor. His rank was just ceremonial. But now he has the Medal of Honor. And between West Point graduates and Leonard Wood, this created a schism between the two that would haunt Leonard Wood his entire military career until the day he died. As it's normal in that time, when men start reaching this high level of stature, they are expected to be married. And he did. In 1890, he marries Louisa Conduit Smith. Louise Smith was very well connected in Washington, D.C. politics. And so this really played well for Leonard Wood. It got him into the social circle he really needed to be a part of. It got him politically connected. And again, with the regular army officers, this caused even more concern because military officers getting heavily involved with political leaders is just never a good sign. It's never going to work out real well. Politics and the military don't really go together. By the way, that bright flash you see behind me is lightning. So
there's the thunder.
Eventually, that political connection gets Leonard Wood assigned to the White House as an assistant surgeon. And here is where he meets another rugged outdoorsman type. And they get to befriend one another and discuss all aspects of the armed services. As they're building this friendship, an event takes place down in Cuba. The USS Maine sinks. And of course, this starts the Spanish-American War. This friend of Leonard Wood agrees to be his second in command, and they form this first U.S. Volunteer Cavalry. His second in command is Theodore Roosevelt, who would later become president of the United States. So here's another connection of Leonard Wood with American history that few people don't ever realize and recognize or even know happens. So Leonard Wood and Roosevelt organize this cavalry. They go down into Cuba. They make this before the charge up San Juan Hill. As they're down there, Leonard Wood has distinguished himself as a military leader. He gets promoted to a general officer in charge of 2nd Cavalry Brigade. This is when Roosevelt takes charge and becomes the commanding officer of the 1st Cavalry, 1st Volunteer Cavalry. And that's when Roosevelt leads the charge that made them famous. As Leonard Wood is coming in after the battle and he's looking around, he sees a wounded lieutenant, Lieutenant Frank R. McCoy. He was a Buffalo soldier from the 10th Cavalry. Leonard Wood gets down off his horse, tends to this man, shows him a great deal of compassion. He's tending his wounds. And Lieutenant McCoy is so moved with Leonard Wood's compassion that he agrees to serve with him as sort of an aide de camp. And not only with Leonard Wood, but he also goes on to serve as an aide de camp with Colonel Theodore Roosevelt. And that name, Frank McCoy, is going to come up again a little bit later on. While he is in Cuba, and after things have settled down there, Major General Wood now is appointed as the military governor of Cuba. And what he begins to do is initiate these social programs, and he's working on infrastructure, and he's trying to improve education. He's really showing a lot of political ambition, a lot of social ambition. He's doing great things for the people in Cuba, not only the civilians, but the soldiers who are stationed there. But there is a killer roaming around in that area in Cuba called yellow fever. And it's killing civilians and it's killing soldiers. Leonard Wood writes back to DC that he needs funding to set up medical testing, medical procedures, something to get this yellow fever under control. And he puts this major in charge of the program, who's also a physician, and eventually develops an antivirus and helps eradicate yellow fever. Now, this doctor is also well known now, and his name still lives on. Major Walter Reed, the namesake for the Walter Reed Army Medical Facility in Washington, D.C. So what you're starting to see here with Leonard Wood is he's got a lot of connections to a lot of American history. Like he's sort of this background force, if you will, and he's helping guide and direct all these different people who go on to reach, might say more fame than him, more success than him.
Sure.
But he keeps on developing Cuba. Well, now he gets nominated to become a brigadier general in the regular army. Well, here come these not so happy West Point guys. They are very, very much against this. They make it very loud and clear to them, President William McKinley, that Leonard Wood is not to receive this promotion, if you will, this appointment as a brigadier general of regular army officers. So McKinley has a problem. He can either take Leonard Wood and put him into the regular army, reducing him from a major general, a 2-star general of volunteers, back to a second lieutenant, but this time as an actual real officer with military duties and responsibilities. Or he can bring him into the regulars as a brigadier general and just ride out the political backlash that's going to come from a lot of the regular army officers. And he endures the backlash. Leonard Wood gets not really demoted, but he moves down to a 1-star general, a brigadier general, but this time instead of volunteers, now he's regular army. So he has a lot more authority in that aspect. Because of his ability to be sort of a military man and a political man, because of his governorship of Cuba, Leonard Wood now gets sent to the Philippines, where he is once again promoted against the grain of a lot of West Point cadets and West Point graduate officers. Now he becomes back to a major general, a 2-star general, and he becomes he's in charge of forces. He's the governor general of the Philippines. He holds that post there from 1903 to 1908. But while he's there, there's some events that kind of cause concern. There were some U.S. Marines that were under his authority who engaged some of the native Philippines. And in the engagement, a lot of women and children were killed. And Leonard Wood had to bear the responsibility for that. Even though he didn't give the order or he wasn't involved in the battle, still right. He was the governor general of that area. So that kind of became a stain on his career, but it didn't hinder it any. His next post, or shortly after leaving the Philippines, he gets named to be the 5th U.S. Army Chief of Staff. And now your West Point people are really just not happy about this. Now they have to listen to and obey the instructions and orders of a doctor who came up with no military training, now was appointed as a regular Army Major General, and is now in charge of the entire United States Army. However, Leonard Wood was never swayed by this animosity that he knew was out there. He knew there were a lot of opponents against him, and he was never swayed. He creates this program of developing young college men to become officers, to kind of hold them in the reserve, get them prepped, get them ready. What Leonard Wood was doing was trying to prepare a next generation of Army leaders to take over. And this was around the 1910 era. So this is only 4 to 5 years before the outbreak of the First World War. This program still exists today, and we know it as the Reserve Officer Training Corps. It was Leonard Wood who started the initial program that is now all across the United States in colleges and in high schools, teaching young men, and now young men and women, military leadership skills and preparing them for military service.
Wow.
However, once he left the chief of staff position, the next chief of staff immediately made alterations to Army regulations so that no medical officer would ever again sit as the chief of staff of the United States Army. And it still remains to this day.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, he was, to say the least, he was quite what we would call today an influencer.
Sounds like it.
You either loved him or you hated him, but there was no middle ground with this guy. But he was very solid in his determination. He was well over 6 foot tall, broad shoulders. He had this very commanding appearance. Now, at the when the First World War broke out, a lot of people were pushing for Leonard Wood to be the commanding officer of United States Expeditionary Forces in Europe. But because of this disdain that a lot of the regular Army officers had, they made it clear that this was not going to work for them. So this is when John J. Pershing rose to fame and earning his 5 stars as General of the Army, taking command of U.S. forces in European theater during the First World War. However, Leonard Wood was then assigned to some military installations in the Midwest, and he began to develop mobile Army tactics. In other words, how are you going to transport equipment from point A to point B? He began to learn and develop these programs. And these are the kinds of training events that still go on to this day at his namesake, Fort Leonard Wood. So he developed what you would call today combat service support tactics. How do you plan ahead? How do you calculate what you're going to need to move X number of troops or X number of equipment from this point to another? How are you going to secure that route? He was very instrumental in developing these kinds of things. Now, while he was not a commanding officer of any kind of forces in Europe, he did go into Europe during the war, kind of survey the land, see how things were going, see how his plans were being executed. So he had a sort of minor impact, if you will, in Army operations during the First World War. Leonard Wood still had his political ambitions, and he did attempt to run for the Republican nomination for president of the United States. He, however, was soundly defeated in that idea, losing to the man who would become the Republican president, Warren Harding. So General Wood retires from military service in October of 1921. He was once again appointed general officer of the Philippines, but this tour would be short-lived. While he was in Cuba, he had an accident where somehow he managed to ram his head into a very heavy chandelier. And this caused a traumatic brain injury that left him with a kind of tumor on his brain.
Oh, wow.
History reports that as this tumor progressed in his brain, it began to affect his mental capacities. His second trip to the Philippines was not a successful one. It is recorded that his demeanor was not one that was, shall we say, a road to success in governing the Philippines. And he was quickly pulled back out of there before things just turned into a horrible disaster. He returns back to the United States, and the tumor would just continue to plague him for the rest of his days. Now, as for his Masonic journey, Leonard Wood became a Master Mason in April 3rd of 1916 in New York. He was a member of, Anglo Saxon Lodge 137 in Brooklyn. Now, the exact time that he became a Scottish Rite Mason is not known, but it's somewhere between 1919 and 1920. We know he was Scottish Rite, but the exact date is just lost in time. Apparently, his ambition and his drive and his success and his leadership, he quickly rose in popularity and success, because after only 8 years of being in the Scottish Rite, he was already nominated to receive his 33rd degree.
Really?
Yes, that is unheard of speed. However, 3 days before his coronation, August the 7th, 1927, Brother Leonard Wood laid down his working tools. He never got the 33rd degree.
Oh,
He
no.
passed away 3 days before his coronation. He was honored by being laid to rest. His final resting place is in Section 21 of Arlington National Cemetery, which is reserved for the Rough Riders. He was buried with the men he led in Cuba, in the San Juan Hill area, along with all the rest of those men. Among his pallbearers, remember Frank McCoy? He's now a Brigadier General. Frank McCoy was one of his pallbearers that helped lay him to rest. He repaid that kindness that Leonard Wood had showed him when he was wounded in combat in Cuba, and so he came to the aid of his friend and companion, his comrade in arms, and helped carry him to his final resting place. Now, while Leonard Wood was in the Philippines, he was well respected, and he did make some good friends. To this day, Leonard Wood Lodge No. 105 continues to be a very active lodge in the Philippines. It's still going strong. As you mentioned at the top of your show, there is Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri that is named in his honor, that I had the wonderful pleasure of attending in the middle of summer. Yeah, that was exciting. But crossing service branches, the Navy has the USS Leonard Wood, which was a assault supply ship that saw action in the Mediterranean, in the invasion from going from North Africa into Sicily, and then it transversed over into the Pacific Ocean, where it was also a part of the island hopping campaign. It was a private ship. It was originally The keel was laid in 1922, but the Navy took possession of the ship in 1941, and it remained in service until it was decommissioned in March of 1946. And then that name was erased from the rolls in April of 46. Now, no current ship bears his name, but there was a Navy vessel for a short while that was engaged in combat back in the matter of fact, the Philippines was one of the islands that the ship that bear his name was involved in.
Oh, is
So
that right?
yeah, he returned to the Philippines, but in the name of a ship, not in his body. So that is the story of Leonard Wood. He was is a very stout man, very determined, and he seems, if you read the history of his life, he seemed to always be fighting against people who did not want to see him succeed because he didn't fit their social norm. And it did not slow him down at all. One of the essays I wrote for the Guthrie College of the Consistory was the importance of being an autonomous man and Mason. And Leonard Wood is the very persona of what that is, to be autonomous, that he was more concerned with upholding virtue and honor and leadership and dignity. And he did not waste his time with scandalous talk or backbiting or anything like that. He was all about the mission. And he lived it, and he carried that out till his last dying day. But
Wow.
he just never quite got to the full level he wanted to get to. Tried to be president, got denied. 33rd degree, God calls him home before he gets there.
Yeah.
So in some ways, he had some rather unique tragedies in his life, but it just never slowed him down.
Yeah. Few tragedies, but so many accomplishments as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that you were stationed at this fort, and I know Brother Dwayne Marshall in the comments on the Facebook side was also saying that he was stationed there as well, from the Past Masters Thoughts blog. So I'm curious, when you were stationed there, were you aware of his Masonic connection, or what is it that got you to really wanting to dig into this as a research topic?
At the time, I was not aware of any relation. I thought Leonard Wood was one word. I didn't realize it was even two names.
Fair enough.
I'm an 18-year-old private having these guys in funny round hats yelling at me who pretty much called me everything but a child of God. It was just a great time. But as I got involved trying to work with the South Carolina Masonic Research Society, and I was looking at a list of famous Masons, and looking down this list, sure enough, there was this name, Leonard Wood. I went, wait a minute. I know that name. I've been there. And so I started researching it and looking at his life and realizing that, oh, I've never heard this about this guy. I need to write this up. People need to hear about what this guy did and his involvement in the course of American history, as well as in the advances in the medical field in eradicating yellow fever.
Yeah. I fully agree with you. And I think these are the very topics that we need to highlight in Masonic history because, Freemasonry itself is not history. We have an amazing history, but it's really nice, especially for all the profane out there that may not fully understand Freemasonry or the purpose or, dig into the conspiracies and all this jazz. When you look up American history like this, world history like this, and you find those connections that these hugely influential characters were also Freemasons, and we can start bringing that history of how this world was shaped. And when you find those massive figures behind it and they were Freemasons, it starts to show that some of those conspiracies don't add up, because all these amazing things, this backbone of, the world that has been built around, so many times you find Masons involved in spectacular ways like this. So, man, hats off to you for digging into this, because this is stuff that we need to know and need to get out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. I have enjoyed digging into his life, and I still look him up to see what else I can find. Like, I'm trying to still find out how in the world did the man hit his head on a chandelier? What, I
Oh,
mean, was he jumping over a couch chasing his kids? What was he doing? How did that happen? And one day I want to find that answer.
sure. Yeah, not Masonic related in any ways, but some of the viewers of this show will know that we have a chicken coop just on the other side of this wall, kind of massive chicken coop we over engineered, and my lovely wife just had to put a chandelier in there. And I have smacked my head on that so many times. There's one time it actually came off the hook and about murdered all the chickens. So now it's
Ooh.
secured there for good. But you mentioned that, and I could feel it because I've hit my head on that stupid chandelier in there so
Oh,
many
yeah.
times, but not to the extent that he did. Obviously we hear, with some traumatic brain injuries that the personality does quite change, but seems like it really, really impacted his life from that point.
It did. The more that tumor started to press on his brain and probably disrupting blood flow and all, you almost have to wonder if he wasn't suffering the mini strokes people refer to, because it as it grew or expanded, he was running the risk of aneurysm. He was running the risk of stroke, and these things, it altered his personality. But from what I've read and what I've studied, even as that tumor progressed, he never swerved from his duty. He maintained that course. His personality may have been affected, but his will and determination just seemed unshakable. No
Sure.
matter what he was confronted with, if it was an injury in his head or regular Army officers trying to divert him off his path.
Right.
He just was not going to give in.
I'm going to throw up here. We've got Brother Dwayne Marshall throwing in the comments, Alpha 410 shoot. I don't know. I'm not a military guy, so I don't know what that means, but I'm sure you do, brother.
That would be Alpha Company, 4th Battalion, probably 10th, probably 10th Brigade or something like that. That's a designation for a military unit. I was Charlie Company, 4th Battalion, 3rd Basic Training Brigade. So, yep, there it is. It's
Fair
Basic
enough.
Training Unit.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I was Charlie 4-3.
Wow.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. I mean, it's been a minute since I've been in Fort Leonard Wood. I remember my drill sergeant's names: Sergeant First Class McKenzie and Staff Sergeant Wirtz. Never going to forget them.
They drilled it into you, didn't they?
Oh, frequently. True story. To this day, I cannot stand, and this is probably going to be pretty hateful, I cannot stand to hear Lee Greenwood, God bless the USA, because every morning in 1984, that song would come over the PA system, followed very shortly by somebody wanting to know why I was still laying in bed. So I hear that song, I cringe. I just want to make my bed and get my PT gear. Ruth, yes, brother, she's right.
So I'm curious. You were talking about when General Leonard Wood got his Scottish Rite reunion class that he went through. Do you happen to know where he joined Scottish Rite?
Let me see. It was Aurora Grata Consistory in Brooklyn.
Brooklyn. Okay, interesting. Very cool. I know. So we've got here in Kansas, in Leavenworth, there's Hancock Lodge, which is actually on Fort Leavenworth. I believe it's the only privately owned building on a military institution by act of Congress, and ended up going back to World War II. They ran out of money and needed a post office, and the lodge there offered to build a lodge and house the post office for free for life, and they still do to this day. So by act of Congress, they were able to have their lodge or their Masonic temple built on the grounds there. But they also have the Armed Forces Scottish Rite, which a little bit forward in World War II era, they had like most of the famous generals of that time go through the same Scottish Rite class the same night. So it kind of made me wonder if maybe that tradition went back a little farther, but I guess not.
Yeah. Well, General Wood, I didn't go mention this part, but he was at one time the commanding officer of what's called Department of the East, and he was stationed at Governor's Island in Manhattan. So probably during that posting is when he would have went through his Masonic degrees and then eventually into the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction. And then he would have, he eventually moved on from there. That's where he left the Department of the East to become the 5th Army Chief of Staff.
Fantastic. Man, you know, this really makes me wonder though, because so we can look back and see so many of our influential military characters had proud Masonic relationships and history behind them. But a lot of that is kept kind of under wraps today. And it makes me wonder in the future if we're going to be able to tie such Masonic history to those individuals, because it's not really talked about nearly as much, especially in those positions. Do you think that'll come to light one day, or do you think it's going to kind of fizzle out as Masonic history goes forward as far as what we have access to or what dots we're able to connect in those regards?
I think as long as there are people like us who still have a care and concern for Masonic history, we're going to keep digging those records up. We're going to find them. We'll always keep a light in that regard. My lodge in particular, I would say more than half of us are veterans. And we have all the branches represented. We have one brother who just recently retired as a captain in the Navy. He was a nuclear engineer. So you can imagine him being a Mason and connected to nuclear power may have been a concern for some people if they, like the take on conspiracy theory notions.
Yeah.
If we're going to take over the world, what's wrong with having a couple of nukes standing by? So,
exactly.
But even he was telling me that even some of his junior officers knew he was a Mason and did not look disfavorably upon that. In fact, they were a little more curious about it. So I think some of our very prominent military men who are in Masonry, they may not be loud about the craft per se, but the way they conduct their lives speaks volumes about the importance of Freemasonry in our society to this day.
So maybe through some of those actions can give us hints of their character, of who to look into a little closer and see, there might be something there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Leonard Wood's life is a lot like an individual who was not a Mason, but he was in England. His name was Charles Jennings. Nobody knows his name, but his influence on the world of music, which of course is very important to us as Masons, as one of the liberal arts and sciences, is staggering. Nobody knows that the name Charles Jennings is associated with an operetta called Messiah, or the world's most performed chorus, the Hallelujah chorus. Charles Jennings wrote the words. He gave it to a friend of his who was almost broke and fixing to go to jail for his debts, and that would be George Frederick Handel. Oh yeah, that's one of those rest of the story educations I've done in relationship to charity, because Charles Jennings just gave him those lyrics. He never took a dime. But Frederick Handel was about to be in prison for not paying his debts, because up to that time, he was a musical failure.
Wow.
But yeah, but Leonard Wood was kind of in that same boat like Charles Jennings. He's not well known, but his influence and what he did in the course of U.S. history and medicine, almost nobody knows about it. He's overshadowed by the shot of Theodore Roosevelt and Walter Reed, the men who
Sure.
went on to have national and worldwide notoriety. But it was Leonard Wood who gave them their start.
Yeah, I just that period of history too. There was so much. Well, I mean, with the wars and everything, there was so much destruction, but in the larger picture, there was so much growth happening in society, in the world, that I think, yeah, we get stuck with those pillar figures, but we fail to see that there's so many more pillars behind those pillars that were shown so
Mhm.
regularly. I mean, these guys did tremendous work to help really pave the way of where we are today. And yeah, so many of them don't get talked about. It makes you wonder how many more stories out there are that will really just kind of blow your socks off.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm certainly trying my best to dig up what I can find and
I know
and
you are.
keep it alive and well. Um, but yeah, I've absolutely enjoyed digging up our history and keeping it in modern light. So
Definitely.
brothers continue to be inspired by the success of these men who came before us, um, and give us courage even in the face of our own adversities. That we can still proceed and we can still be successful, and even if we're well known or not, we'll still make an impact on this world in a positive light.
I hear you, brother. That's fantastically said. And I got to give hats off to you though, because it's one thing to dig in and find cool history and find meaning behind this stuff, and it's a whole nother to pass that knowledge on. And a lot of guys just don't have the desire to, or aren't comfortable in doing so.
Mhm.
But brothers like yourself that are willing at a dime to come on a show like this and talk to brothers that are going to hear this on Monday on a podcast, or go to the Double Eagle Con and get up in front of people and share this, you know that is what gets the history out there to so many people that otherwise would not know. And if you think about it, all this stuff that we're discovering, we shouldn't really be discovering. It was known. It was all facts at one point, but we forget about it because we don't pass that message on enough. And then we have to rely on somebody to dig it up years in the future. So really, as historians today, we need to be practicing more to steadily pass that information on as we find it so that the next generation's more in the know than ours was.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, one of the things you can compare history to exploring symbolism.
Mm,
The one thing they have in common is their original purpose and meaning get lost in time. And
yeah.
as the events move on, it kind of just builds up over them. And then you forget where you came from or how everything started to begin with. And exploring the roots of history of Masonry and the great men of Freemasonry, now we know where we started from. We understand where we came from. We understand why we are the way we are. And when you kind of have that fact rooted in the Masonic mind, it helps secure the truths of Masonry and keep them firmly established.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Now you mentioned the Double Eagle Con, and I didn't get a chance to go to that, but it
Mhm.
looked amazing. What topic did you present when you were there? Was it this or?
Mhm. No, it wasn't historical. It was how do I put this? Allegorical.
Okay,
Uh,
sure.
uh, I was in college. I did a literary analysis on the American poet Robert Frost, and I was a business major at the time. And when I wrote that paper, my college professor, Dr. Gloria Henderson, pretty much grabbed me by my ear, drugged me to the dean's office, and said, "He's becoming an English major now." I went, "Yes, ma'am." Now as a Mason and still being familiar with his poetry, I began to dig into it and found a lot of Masonic allusions. So at Double Eagle Con, I did this this education called The Wonders of Nature,
I love that.
Masonic imagery in the poetry of Robert Frost. Um, if you look at poems like Directive, for example, uh, Directive, it's kind of a lengthy poem, but it's about stepping back from the world and going through the process and taking that journey to rediscover your innocence.
Mm,
And it ends with the traveler, as I called him, uh, at the base of a tree near a creek, where there is a child's cup hidden that he references to like the Holy Grail.
okay.
And that if you take and drink the waters, you will be renewed and made whole again. Um, Consequently, that poem kind of bears on Leonard Wood, because part of that journey includes ignoring um, what he calls the coldness from Panther Mountain, which you can see as a persona of cold friends. Um, you have gossipers, you have over exuberant youth who question you at your age and you're taking this journey. So when you look at the poetry of Frost, you look at the Masonic teachings, it just opened up, and so that's what I did for an education for them.
Fantastic. Now, that sounds fascinating. It looked like an amazing event, and now it sounds like it was one as well.
It was a great opportunity to go up there and meet brothers from just way outside my jurisdiction.
Sure.
Of course, I'm not sure who we thought talked funnier, them their Chicago accents or me with my Southern drawl. It was quite the social exchange in that regard, because I'm sitting around looking for a glass of sweet tea, and there just ain't one to be found. That ain't got rosemary or whatever fruit they put in that stuff. But like, no, just brew tea and give me some sugar, be good.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to be careful looking for brown liquid. You get the wrong one real quick.
Ooh, no, I want to see that come out of a pitcher, not a bottle.
Exactly. Yeah. You're expecting sweet tea and you get sweet whiskey. That's a surprise.
Yeah, that'd be a shock to the senses. Like, wow. But yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. The Valley of Chicago is just an amazing building.
Yeah.
The Gothic structure of it, that huge double eagle mural had to be every bit of 30 feet tall.
Wow.
Yeah.
Making me jealous, man. I've got to get out there now. I've got to see it. I know there's some amazing brothers up that way, so I have no doubt they're strong and doing well. But I need to see it for myself.
Yes, I would certainly encourage anyone who can make that trip to Chicago. You got to go see that place. Yeah,
and they're doing that event again, are they not?
They did do it last year, and I'm hoping they're going to do another one this year. What's his name? Johnson, R.J. Johnson.
Yeah, good friend. Good friend.
Yeah, he was a guy who contacted me about coming up there, and we still chat every once in a blue moon. But yeah, I hope they continue that on. Of course, I'm excited to see what y'all do with your Kansas Masonic Con that's coming up in what, July? Is that right?
Yeah, July 27th. Yeah, it'll be our third one. Really, really looking forward to it. It's before that we just didn't have anything like that in Kansas. We would have different events with one speaker that would come in, and everyone just had this crave for Masonic education and talking about how it should be in your lodge, and just really never done. And then we bring MasonicCon, where it's like an overdose of Masonic education, and it's really taken off. So I'm stoked. Last two have been amazingly enjoyable, and expect nothing less for this one.
Absolutely. Well, I hope it goes well for y'all.
Well, brother, I am so appreciative to have you on this night. Learned so much. I was kind of the same. You hear those names of the forts, and being a history guy should just know, but I think I always just said it as one word as well, and would have never known that he was a Mason. And I learned some really valuable history tonight that I'm stoked to know, and really kind of itching to dig in myself now as well. So you've created a monster. Way to go. No.
Then my work here is done.
That's half the fun, right? But
Absolutely.
we are at the top of the hour, and we always end this show off with a toast. And I want to see if you would be kind enough to offer us up a toast this evening.
I sure will. I've got my
Thank you,
handy
brother.
dandy cup of great crystal light. What I'd like, person I'd like to offer a toast to is a man who is known nationally, although he is no longer with us. It was his will and desire of me that I would continue work with Masonic education and keep putting South Carolina in a positive light in that regard. And a lot of y'all know this man, if you're Scottish Rite, to the late, most worshipful brother and illustrious Michael D. Smith, the late Lieutenant Grand Commander of the Southern Jurisdiction. He taught me the importance of being successful while maintaining your humility. And I love the man dearly. He will always be an inspiration to me. So, to my beloved friend and late brother, Michael D. Smith.
You're here. Cheers. Fantastic. Brother, so stoked to have you on this night. Really, really fascinating stuff. Please keep doing what you do. Keep digging up that history. I can't wait to hear more from you. And maybe we can get you out to Kansas to talk as well.
Oh, you know what? I would absolutely love that. I'm making a journey out to Guthrie in April. I'm so excited to go out there for their spring reunion.
I hear you can't go wrong in Guthrie.
No, there are 4 of us flying from Charleston going out there. Of course, I'm an adept of the college. And I really hope I get to meet illustrious brother Robert Davis. He was what you might call my advisor as I was going through. And I must have broke him, because as soon as I graduated college, he said, I'm done. he retired. So I'm like,
he's a fantastic guy.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking forward to meeting him and just whoever I can out there. I like being the salt of the earth guy. If I see somebody sitting alone at a table, I'm the guy who's going to walk over there so he's not sitting by himself.
Love that.
I just want to go meet people and shake their hands and tell them what an honor it is to get to meet them.
That's what it's all about, brother.
Oh yeah, brother. I love it,
man. Thank you so much for all you do for the craft. Thank you for coming on tonight and giving us some amazing history. Really, really appreciate it. Please tell your family thank you for letting us steal you away to learn some of this tonight. And man, with that, I can't wait to have you back on and hear for your next lecture that you got, because I know you got some other great stuff behind you.
Oh, I might have 1 or 2 hanging around, lingering around somewhere. But yeah, it's an honor, a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Brethren, keep up the good work. Dig into history. You'll love the journey. That I can promise you.
Hear, hear. All right, brothers. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next month. Until then, keep preserving the history of Freemasonry. Good night.